Hello, and thank you for tuning in. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. My name is Elisa Zanola, and I'm head of events for the Fashion Scholarship Fund. As we're all extremely familiar with Zoom at this point, there are some great features we'd love for you to utilize. One of them is the chat box. Feel free to send comments to the panelists as the discussion is going on. And there's also the Q&A box. We'd love for you to submit any and all questions, and we'll answer as many as possible during the Q&A segment of the session. And now I'd like to turn it over to our Executive Director, Peter Arnold.
Thank you, Elisa. You're getting so good at this. Welcome everybody to, I can't quite believe it's week 7 of our Summer Scholar series, and Tuesdays are workforce preparedness sessions. Tonight's is themed FSF's hard look at marketing analytics. We're really excited to share with you from some dynamic presenters their real life experiences on the topic and in the field, and then from the author of the case study and from some scholars who competed successfully, what this year's case study prompt is all about. So I'm especially happy to welcome from SAP, which is a FSF friend and supporter, Kara Reed, who will be tonight's moderator. Kara is the Solution Manager, Retail Industry Business Unit at SAP. Welcome, Kara. And Kara is joined by Rolanda Evelyn from sunny California, who is a 2016 FSF scholar from the University of Pennsylvania and currently the manager of product marketing and customer strategy at Rent the Runway. Good to see you, Rolanda. Rolanda's also joined by Carolina Kennedy, who's the senior director of digital lifecycle marketing at Tapestry. Welcome, Carolina. And we also have Jasmine Bacchus, who's a 2019, 2020, and 2021 FSF scholar, just graduated from Brown University, summer legal intern at Saks Fifth Avenue. Welcome, Jasmine. And last but certainly not least, Avni Patel, who is a 2015 FSF scholar from the University of Texas, Austin, and currently in a new position, Director Operations at Depop. Congratulations, Avni, and welcome. Kara, I'm going to turn this over to your very capable hands.
Great. Well, let's get started. Now, I'm super excited about the topic of marketing analytics today because I was a marketing major in college. And when I started my career at SAP, I focused on our analytics technology in the retail space. So I love being able to get back to my roots. But let's talk to Rolanda and Carolina, and I'm curious to find out, A, how you guys got to where you are today, and then what are your current roles, what are your overall responsibilities, and the day-to-day tasks that you do. So Carolina, would you like to start?
Sure, happy to go first. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for this opportunity. Happy to be here. So my career really started in email marketing and at a magazine in Chicago, which is where I'm originally from. And what's very interesting to me about email is the data and the creative piece and the mesh of the two together. So really understanding database marketing at its core. And at the time we were on Responsis when you can only use SQL. So leveraging my information systems major skills for database querying came in very, very handy, but really understanding how we can incorporate data analytics reporting to influence not only our creative and messages, but serve our customers in the best way. So really the foundation in email. And for any of those that are thinking of, email marketing or direct marketing in any sense, you're at the front lines, you're in the inbox of millions of customers daily. And so being strategic and not bombarding our customers or your customer with too many emails and leveraging the data and analytics to have a customer first mindset is kind of how I grew up in the industry. So just to round out my experience, I continued throughout email marketing for a number of different companies, and then transitioned into a bigger retention role where I was responsible for customer programs, really, again, leveraging that foundation in database email marketing to fuel customer programs. So everything from loyalty to in-store events to direct mail programs, email marketing, just to name a few. And now I'm responsible for our customer data platform at Tapestry. Tapestry is inclusive of Coach Kate Spade and Stuart Weitzman, as well as managing and leading our email center of expertise and SMS within my team. And then lastly, customer programs, which is a new addition focused on loyalty and clienteling. But again, I think that foundation in data plus creative and storytelling and communication is really what really grounded my career and forged a way in a successful digital path forward.
Thanks. Rolanda?
Yeah, absolutely. Carolina, +1 to so many of the things that you said. At Rent the Runway, we rely very heavily on our email marketing team and our engagement marketing team. So totally agree with marrying the data and the creative. For me, I am pretty new to Rent the Runway. I celebrated my 1-year anniversary last year. And I can't not shout out FSF because Elisa and Peter know this story, but I'll tell you guys that the way that I first met Jen Hyman, who's the CEO of Rent the Runway, was at an FSF gala where I was presenting an award to her. And a couple of months later, I was able to start in my role on the product marketing and customer strategy team. So huge shout out to the kinds of opportunities, big and small, that FSF provides. Day to day, the product marketing and customer strategy team is very cross-functional. We work across many of the teams here at Rent the Runway, but I would say more generally, our focus is to make sure that our members are happy in their subscription program. So for those of you who don't know, Rent the Runway has various subscription plans where you can sign up for the amount of items you would like to rent for the month. And so you can kind of think of our team wanting to make sure that our members are happy, they stay active, we retain them, making sure that we understand what their challenges and pain points are, what feedback they have for us, all of those things. Our members are very vocal. People care very much about what they wear day to day, especially now as we're all starting to get dressed back up again and really head outside. So it's been quite the journey over the last couple of months, seeing the transition as we all start getting dressed up again. So that's a little bit about the product marketing team at Rent the Runway.
That's great. And I like that we have both Rent the Runway and Tapestry here because it's two companies that are in the same space, but have totally different business models. And so your marketing strategies are probably a little bit different. And I know for the 2022 marketing analytics case study prompt that the applicants are encouraged to research their chosen company's marketing strategy and then determine what some strengths and weaknesses are with it. So in your companies, what KPIs do you and your teams use to measure success? And to help our applicants out, are there any resources that you know of that can help them to see both the micro and the macro view of the company's objectives? So Rolanda, do you want to take this one first?
Sure. For KPI, so you have to think about it, and on this side of the business, we're a subscription business. So you can imagine that some of the ones I might say might be a little different than what Carolina talks about. So when thinking about our subscription business, we want to make sure that our members are retained, right? Which means month to month, they stay active. Every time that they have the opportunity, every month that their bill date comes around, they have the opportunity to cancel. So for us at Rent the Runway, NPS is a pretty big metric that we monitor quite closely. For those of you who don't know, NPS stands for Net Promoter Score. So that is if you are willing to recommend your product or service to a friend or family member. Across the industry, some businesses say that NPS is a good tracker of their business. Some say that it isn't. At Rent the Runway, we found that it tracks quite neatly with the ebbs and flows of our business. So it's been quite a useful metric for us to figure out when tailwinds are coming about. So that's a metric that we track. Churn rate is a metric that we track. So you can kind of think about if there's a way for us to predict if a member is going to churn, meaning if they're going to cancel, we start to think about what patterns or trends might emerge. So is it more likely for a member who has been around for a couple of weeks to churn versus a member who's been around for a couple of months? And that would influence what kind of messaging we might target that user, knowing that we want to catch them if they're likely to churn. Another thing to think about would be if someone in a certain region of the country is more likely to churn versus someone else. So you can start thinking about things like that. Lastly, I would say another metric that we we track quite frequently is our detractor reason. So getting back to NPS, detractor means if we were to ask you, are you willing to recommend us? And you say no, we want to understand why, right? What are the roadblocks in between there that makes you not want to recommend Rent the Runway as a product or service? And then how can we go about, introducing new features or updating anything that we currently have live to mitigate those roadblocks? And you can imagine we'd hope that in the next 6 months, if we were to ask you again, that answer might change. So that's your first point about KPIs. Your second point about looking at some of the marketing strategies that the current company might be employing. I did this quite recently when I was interviewing not too long ago. I would say I basically consumed all content from Rent the Runway. So sign yourself, go on their website, go to the company's website and sign up so you can get their newsletters or any of their automated email marketing that I'm sure Carolina will talk to you about. And you can start to see some of the messaging that the team is using to really understand their customers. Follow them on social, make sure you're consuming the content that they produce. Really start to get into the shoes and the brains of the customer that they're trying to market to. And by making sure that you're just completely being as informed about what kinds of messaging you're seeing, I think can really help build out your perspective when you want to start thinking about what improvements or what recommendations you might have for a marketing strategy moving forward.
Yeah, that's great. I always say one of the best parts about being in retail is that you can go experience the brand firsthand and learn what it's like to, shop with them or work with them. And so it's one of the advantages, I would say, of being in retail.
Absolutely.
Carolina, what about you?
Sure. I would say the one metric to rule them all is retention rate. Are you delivering experiences that will get your customers to come back and shop? So as we think of customer analytics and breaking that down, customer means that they have shopped with you before. And so enticing customers, and I'm sure it varies by brand, but all retailers have a one and done problem where you have great new customer acquisition, often generated by paid media, particularly social media. And then what do you do with them? They shop once and then they go away. So Rolanda mentioned churn and churn prevention. So thinking at a high level of retention rate and how do you improve that repeat purchase rate from converting customers who have only shopped once to 2 times, 3 times? Because what you will see over time is that the customer's value becomes significantly more over time within the tenure he or she has with you and your company and your brand. And so really fostering relationships, and I've seen it consistently across several of the companies I've worked with in the first, call it, 30 to 100 days of that first purchase relationship is incredibly important. So breaking down retention rates, not only in the 12-month period, but also thinking through what does retention look like in the first 30 days? What does it look like in the first quarter, et cetera? And really being prescriptive around duration of repeat purchase within a specific customer group. I will say we also look at churn and churn prevention. We use models to predict a one-to-one version of when a specific customer will churn versus somebody else. So my shopping patterns might be very different than Kara, than yours. And so having a more customized frequency, especially if you're going to use tactics such as promotions to get customers to come back and return, is incredibly important. So you don't start to erode margin and give away margin dollars as you think about retaining your customers that ideally are full price shoppers. So that I would say is the one KPI that rules them all. Of course, there are many, many other, you can get much more specific in terms of channel. So in email, things like dollars per circulation are incredibly important. Email, open rate, click-through rate, click to open rate, measuring your engagement of your file. But again, retention rate is the one that I would say if I had to pick one and only that I would use. Secondly, in terms of resources, go to the company's investor relations sites. You will find a plethora of information, 10K filings, press releases, all sorts of really valuable information, even as crazy as how really cool technologies that companies use, really interesting information if you dig deep into the investor relations sites. I echo what Rolanda said on the customer front. Visit a store. Now that hopefully at post-COVID, it feels more comfortable, listen to customers, talk to associates, ask questions. People love that in retail. They want to engage. And so between visiting stores, signing up for any marketing communications, even it sounds crazy, calling up customer service, having a conversation could lead to a really interesting conversation. Something you might not have thought of before, but they like to hear, inquisitive, interesting questions, and will often route you to the right person internally to potentially gather more information or learn more about the organization. So that's my 2 cents on the
Thank
topic.
you.
Carolina, you made me remember, and these are such great ideas. You made me remember that when I was interviewing, I also would listen to there are a bunch of retail conferences, especially in the last year, that had to be virtual and recorded. So
Yeah.
I was
Absolutely.
watching talks by the CEOs or the chief operating officer or the chief marketing officer. And those are really great places to understand the vision. But what I found was maybe even more interesting is if you go to the end, there's often 5 to 10 minutes of Q&A from the press. And those questions are often the questions that you want to know the answers to that may not be posted online or may not have a written answer, but you can hear what the official talk track is directly from the CEO. So those are definitely things that I found as great resources when I was just trying to understand what Rent the Runway was trying to envision, in the next 2, 3, 5 years.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You guys had such great ideas. I never thought of calling customer service and just seeing what they had to say, but that's, again, another channel to interact with and see how it goes. So speaking of all the different marketing channels that are out there, would you both speak to which media channels you use and which marketing tactics you've implemented during the various stages of the marketing funnel and kind of how that progresses? So I don't know, Carolina, if you want to start again.
Sure. So when I think of marketing, I think of a life cycle based approach. So yes, email, that's what I think is oftentimes the obvious choice. But then how do you show up for the customer on the website in a very significant way that mirrors the message you're sending to her in email? How do you show up in SMS? How do you show up in stores with the store associate dialogue? And so really thinking, when possible, omni-channel with consistent messaging. And in my past career, we've done testing that's proven the more consistent touch points and messaging you have, the more impactful it would be to drive retention rate. I'll back to retention. And so I would say, the best way you can orchestrate your communications across multiple channels is to think first, what's the biggest bang for your buck? Where do you have the biggest reach? And then expanding from there.
Great. Rolanda?
Yeah, I'll jump in. +1 to what Carolina said. So on our end, again, we're focusing on membership versus our acquisition team. Given that, the past year was probably not the best time to be outwardly marketing a luxury fashion subscription service, we had to be really creative in how we reached our customers, both our active members, our pause members, and any folks that we were trying to win back. So to Carolina's point, email was our #1 channel. Not only is it effective, it's free for us. And so we would often do tailored email segments. So based on if you're active or paused, or based on when you signed up, we would have specific comms for you. We would then often mirror our email communications with our in-product experience. So Rent the Runway has an owned and operated app. How can we make sure that when you, talking about consistency to Carolina's point, how can we make sure that when you read an email comm and then we bring you to our on-site app or website, it reflects what you just saw, whether that be the merchandising that we're talking about, whether it wasn't, let's say, an event-based email, so talking about a specific occasion that you want to rent for, or let's say there's a specific promotion or sale on items. How do we make sure that we're telling a complete story from email to app? And then third, we actually saw quite a bit of traction with push notifications. We, in the past, had push notifications and we would kind of use them paired with email, but we've kind of been testing a new strategy where we're doing behavior-based push notifications. So if there's something we need our members to do, whether that be place a new shipment or heart a couple of items that they want to hold on to for the future, or even just plan around if we know that there's a specific holiday coming up and we want folks to rent for that, using the push notifications to drive people back in product when it makes the most sense. So those have been super helpful for us just because it's what we have, homegrown. Now that we're transitioning, to a post-COVID world, hopefully, we have been experimenting with out of home, both for TV buys and like subway buys, which I'm learning a lot now that those are very expensive, but I think it's a really exciting moment for us to come back in a big way as folks again start thinking about getting dressed up. So you can be as creative when thinking about free channels. Don't think that you have to have a big marketing spend in order to make an impact. There are definitely channels that are going to be readily available to you that are more cost efficient.
Yeah, I love that. Consistency is definitely key. Okay, so we're kind of running out of time. We only have about 5 minutes left. So we're going to do a little bit of a rapid fire round on these ones. So the next question is, what are the cross-functional teams that you guys have to work with to execute on these marketing strategies that come up?
I'll go first.
Yeah.
Who don't I work with? It's everybody from legal to creative to the brand teams, everybody. And I think talking about kind of what's been successful, at least in my experience, is being able to really tailor your ask, your communication to various teams. The way you communicate an ask to tech is very different than legal, very different than creative. And oftentimes in marketing roles, you'll need to work very cross-functionally in order to really develop change and to get your initiatives done. So everybody, I would say.
Love that
Even
answer.
leadership and then below in stores, everyone.
What Carolina said, I'll just add some of the folks that +1 to everyone she said. I also work with our customer service team. As you can imagine, as we roll out new products, our agents have to know how to talk about them. So giving them talking points and going through training is a big part of my day. UX and UI, so our design team, making sure again that our product experience is going to match what our brand and content team puts in that email is so important. And then of course our comms and PR team, making sure that our external talking points are going to match what we say internally in the email and to our CX agents. So everyone.
Plus
you don't miss
vendors.
anyone. Yeah.
Plus vendors.
Yes.
Exactly. Well, you guys talked a lot about, some of the digital channels and strategies that you guys use for marketing, but what are some real life examples of non-traditional ones you've done, like gamification or local events or philanthropic events?
Sure, I can share. One particular event that I did at a prior company was kind of a road show with at the time, creative director. I was at J. Crew. And so we did a roadshow with Jenna Lyons and the turnout was amazing. We invited our top customers, sales were skyrocketing in the stores during that time. And so, really not so traditional marketing that we ran, but inviting some of our top customers to really experience a Q&A session with a leader of the brand was incredibly important. And then we also tracked the metrics from those particular customers and really proved out that it did have a lasting impact from a very specific time in place within those events.
That's really interesting. Rolanda, what about you?
Yeah, really quickly, I'll add, this is before my time at Rent the Runway, but we have visions of what this could look like in the future. We would host events in our store. So our storefronts were normal stores. You'd go pick out items, try them on, leave. And the team had an idea of why couldn't we use our store as an event space? And so effectively we have stores in DC, San Francisco, New York, LA. We would invite women change makers, leaders in the community to come to the store. We would have a panel, oftentimes to Carolina's point, from a leader at the company. People want to hear about what people are thinking about at Rent the Runway. It was a great way to like have customers and prospective customers meet each other. These are also women business owners, people in the community who have impact. And I'm sure for some of you on the call, you can identify with the idea that, you know, clothing is such an emotional and like external bonding moment. And so we just saw that those events really took off like wildfire, because once you connected women and they saw the magic of Rent the Runway, they wanted to go tell every other person that they knew. And it was kind of a ripple effect. So obviously with COVID, we haven't had IRL events, but I think that there's so much magic that we can bring from that moving forward.
I absolutely agree. I've been to certain events for different companies, including one at Tapestry a few years ago. And, you know, I didn't leave without empty-handed, of course. And then it really does build a loyalty and a bond you have with that company when you get to hear the leaders speak. So we'll go to the last question. Which is for one of the facets for the case study for the marketing analytics is that the students need to create an action plan. And so this is probably going to, you know, potentially be the first one that they ever created. So how do you tackle action plans, and what is some advice you have for the scholar applicants? Rolanda, do you want to start? I know you're probably newer to this.
Yeah, no, gosh, lots of action plans at Rent the Runway. I would say number one is being open-minded and being flexible. So for us, we'll often say, you know, here's our short-term, midterm, and long-term goal. And you can kind of break it out like that. What do we hope to accomplish in the short term? And then be flexible with what comes next. I would say like making sure that there's space and room for experimentation and iterating. So actually for something that we launched today, an hour ago, we actually don't know what the next step in our action plan is going to be, because we're going to wait and see what the results are that will determine what the next iteration is. So I think sometimes having space in your plan to learn and pivot or continue down the proposed path is a great idea, because sometimes you're going to launch and see that something goes some way completely differently than you had expected. But I think just making sure that you have detailed, like I said, short-term, midterm, and long-term goals can help set and pave the path to make sure that you can move forward.
I completely agree. And just the one thing I would add that has proven successful for me is what I like to call a dress rehearsal. Even before something launches, or even before you're actually in the work within the plan, test it out, pretend it's real, and actually do the work and see where the holes are within the process, within the plan.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. I think this was an excellent panel, and you guys have such great insight into your roles and into this marketing analytics world. So Elisa, I'm going to turn it over to you to share your screen to dive into the prompt.
Great. And Peter, if you'd like to say a few quick words before we dive in.
Sure. I think probably that's going to be a tough act to follow, Rolanda and Carolina. Thank you for that, and thank you for your enthusiasm. But Avni, Jasmine, we're going to ask you, if you can, to walk us through the prompt. Would be really helpful.
Awesome, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Avni, and to go ahead and kick it off, let's chat about this case study. So the main objective here is to develop an innovative marketing strategy for a brand of your choice, analyzing its current marketing and communications, identifying areas for improvement, and proposing new approaches. So the main idea is that we take a brand that you like, or you want to choose for your case study. You say what it's doing well or not, and kind of assess what its current activities are. And then you propose a new plan for the upcoming time period at hand. So your goal is to really determine an authentic approach your brand should take to resonate with the prospective and current customers, both from a traditional marketing perspective in addition to a brand values perspective. So some of the traditional marketing perspectives are sort of the channels and activations that a business would typically have, but then some brand values that we would think about would be things like social justice, human rights, and mental health. And the brand that you choose could potentially already champion some of these values and do things to activate against them, or they might not, but you might make a recommendation that some of these brand values are, on brand for your brand or retailer and should be pursued with the marketing strategy. So it's kind of broken out into two ways of thinking about this. There's sort of the campaigns and the campaigns planning. So you'd like to do this for an existing brand or retailer in the following categories listed on the slide. I saw a question about whether the company had to be public, and the answer is no, to my knowledge. And you can choose any brand that is popular and existing today under these categories. So you'd want to plan the strategy for the first half of 2022. So that's going to be Q1 and Q2, meaning the first 3 months, the Q1 of 2022, and then the second 3 months of 2022. And then what you'd like to do is propose the media channels to use. So we've had a lot of conversations about what channels these two lovely ladies use in their job the most, but then also thinking about holistically for the business when you're thinking about these 5 different stages of the marketing funnel, going from awareness to consideration, purchase, retention, and advocacy. What are the different ways that you'd want to speak to the consumer and across which channels, and how should be some of the thought that you put into your case study. One thing to note here is there are a few different funnels you might see when you look on the internet or look at your academic resources, but this is the one that we think that kind of takes you through a more holistic approach, because that advocacy at the end means that your user is not only an active user, but they love you so much they're willing to talk to their friends about you or recommend you, which is part of that NPS metric that we were talking about earlier. So this is definitely the one that we would recommend you kind of orient yourself towards as you go through the case study. So as you do that, you want to think about the type of content you'd plan to use, asset formats, meaning would you use video, a banner, user-generated content? What are the types of different assets you would need that actually go into your marketing? And then the messages that you'd want to use. So what kind of specific text or copy do you want to tell your users when they see you or your viewers? And then would you want to have any call to action there? Call to action usually means, when you show the marketing message, what do you want them to do with it? And not all assets have to have it, but, for example, on an Instagram story, you'll see like swipe up to look at more. And the person in the story will say like, check out the shop or check out this product. The checking out the product or the shop would be the call to action, and you swiping up would be the button that helps you go through that route to then follow that call to action. So that's the example there. And then anything with creative direction. So, how you'd visualize that asset. So if it's a video, what's in that video? If it's a photo or some copy and a photograph, what would you think would be in that asset? So those are the types of content that we would want you to think through. And then you'd also want to think through a lot of the paid and free levers that we've talked about as well a lot in the prior conversation. So things you have access to both as a company resource, like your email marketing or text marketing or anything like this, and then and then paid levers, such as like TV placements or social media advertising or anything else like that. So when we say analytical approach, I think the main thing to keep in mind here is we heard a lot of like strategy when we were thinking about that panel discussion just now. There's a lot of thought behind the why and who the customer is and how they're behaving. So I think that's what we're really aiming for here when we say analytical approach, instead of maybe like, hard numbers and Excel spreadsheet and these specific dollars and performance and return and all these types of things. So it's more about the way of thinking and the mindset as you go through the campaign strategy versus more the actual hard numbers behind every single thing in your strategy. So some of the points to consider here would say, what's your company's existing marketing strategy? What are they doing today? And some of the sources of information where you could find this is all the things we mentioned just now about putting yourself in the shoes of the retailer and seeing how they speak to you, or looking at any PR or news coverage or any other content that the company chooses to put on their site for recent sort of huge marketing amplifications. And then what are some of the strengths and recent successes of the chosen company based on what you're seeing? What do you like? What do you think works for the customer that you think the target customer is? What did you think worked particularly well for that company? And then are there any areas that your company you think needs improvement? Is there anything missing? Is there anything that you felt that the competition maybe did better than them, or the leaders in the industry did better than them? So like I was chatting about a little bit earlier, the objective is not to collect and analyze specific marketing performance data. It would be very, very tough to find a company's digital marketing and total marketing spend and look at how many impressions and returns and everything that they serve through that. So it's definitely not what we're asking here. It's more about thinking through how would you propose a marketing strategy in a strategic way that thinks about all these different pieces of the funnel that we were talking about in the prior page, that takes into account different channel opportunities and the tactics within them, and really make something better and stronger compared to what they have today. So you do want to think across the marketing strategy, activations, and any other pieces of content that you think the company does that can support your strengths and weaknesses. So some of the things that were discussed earlier too are not necessarily traditional marketing channels, but there's still something publicly speaking to the consumer or that the consumer will see. So you can definitely include any of that too in that third bullet, the other content.
Great, I'm up next. Hey guys, I'm Jasmine. I completed the marketing case study for 2 years in a row, kind of 3. So I'm going to give you guys some tips on how to approach kind of the campaign part, which is almost like the bulk of your case study. A fun fact about me, I studied political science and philosophy in undergraduate, so I'm not like a business student. And I'm telling you this to say that you can tackle this marketing case study without being a marketing student, without having a marketing internship. Just like Omni kind of said, it's all about coming up with that analytical approach, being really creative. And I think that's what's making this both very fun and very doable if you're willing to put in the time and do some research yourself. So obviously there's the fun part, which is really coming up with the what campaign would you want to see for this company? What types of things do you feel like would be really interesting? And then after you have the what, I would really go with the how, is like, how am I actually going to make this campaign successful? And that's when you're bringing in, we've talked about KPIs. It's really cool if you have this like awesome idea and you come up with all these creative strategies, but if you can't figure out a way to measure how it would actually be successful, then there's going to be a disconnect in your case study. So I think really blending the what and the how is super important as you approach slides 3 through 5 in the deck. I mentioned that I didn't have a marketing background. So if you're wondering how you might start tackling this yourself, I think there are a couple of resources that I found to be super helpful over the past couple of years. First of all, I feel like you should be looking at the news. Yes, for the earlier part of the case study, you have to do some research on your chosen company and some of their competitors. But in my opinion, I would be looking at Business of Fashion, Women's Wear Daily, Vogue Business regularly as you start looking at your case study, because you'll see a lot about what other retailers happen to be doing, especially when you get to the part where you have to come up with maybe like a creative marketing strategy. I think it's super helpful. Be looking at the news, seeing what other companies are doing. I had that like poli-sci background, so I really liked looking at marketing journals and seeing what types of research was out there too. That became super helpful for me when I went to the KPI section and I'm thinking about how am I measuring success, what types of data are going to be important in measuring success. I found that approach, looking at marketing journals and kind of like what's the scholarship on understanding consumer behavior, to be super helpful when I was coming up with my campaigns. Also, if you feel like you're coming across terms in some of these journals or research that you don't know, I was a big supporter of like Googling things and making sure I truly understood every term I put in my deck. Because maybe you're not super familiar with all the KPIs that we've talked about today. Definitely make yourself feel really comfortable with those terms before you start throwing metrics on your page. And then lastly, I really think mentorship is super important. I'm a big fan of LinkedIn. I'm a big fan of reaching out to people on LinkedIn. If you are working on this deck and you're wondering, is this campaign feasible? Does this feel doable? I think the FSF network is huge. If you reach out to people on LinkedIn who have marketing experience and say, hey, do you have 5 minutes to chat with me? I had a couple of ideas on a case study. I had a lot of success with people being willing to just chat with me. And I bounced out like, hey, what if I did like a pop-up shop? Do fashion companies actually do that? And a lot of times people will chat you through, yeah, that's actually something that I've done in my job and here's how I measure it. That was super helpful for me when I was tackling this aspect of the case study. And then on the next slide, so we also, in the case study, are going to talk about cross-functional teams. So I think this one is really fun because like Carolina and Rolanda mentioned earlier, I think the marketing team probably touches every team in a company. So instead of just saying every team without actually understanding what that means, one resource that I think would be helpful, FSF has been doing workforce preparedness sessions all throughout the summer. And they keep an archive of all of the video sessions they've had. These were opportunities to hear from executives, people in the fashion industry, people in the beauty industry, talk about their jobs. even if the session didn't say like CMO, a lot of times marketing was coming up in those sessions. So in my opinion, one way to start thinking about cross-functional teams would be to take a look at some of those workforce preparedness sessions, listen to some of the leaders that were speaking in those sessions, and it'll help you get a sense for where the marketing team fits in a fashion company or in a retailer. Because a lot of times if you hear like a CEO maybe talk about their overarching strategy, they'll touch on how marketing fits into that overarching strategy and how the finance is fitting in that strategy and how the legal team fits in that strategy. And I think that will really help you then when you tackle this slide for your own campaign. Another thing I think, I mean, again, I talked about networking, and also I know what I was going to mention. So another thing that I think is helpful is if you are like me, so this summer I'm interning in legal. I'm not even in the marketing team right now, but I can truly say that even interning as a legal intern this summer, I have like worked a lot with the marketing team. So if your interest right now, you're like wondering, do I like marketing? Is this for me? I think this slide will actually really help you as well, because you'll understand like where you're touching, again, where marketing sits, how it interacts with other functions in the business.
Awesome. So we did chat a little bit about some of these non-traditional events and activities that companies have done in the past. And so this slide is more about thinking about what are some more of those non-traditional strategies that you would propose for your company. So anything like cause marketing, which is like partnering with nonprofits or any other social justice or other important messages, and basically either co-marketing with them, or you as the retailer or brand just sending a message for that cause and not really, asking for anything in return from it in terms of like sales or coming to your company. There's things like philanthropy, experiential events, gamification, grassroots, meaning anything like local and coming from the communities, and then other types of localized marketing activities. So this is not meant to be the list that you choose from. It's meant to be your time to shine and be as creative as you like in terms of how you think the brand could kind of break through the barrier and do some kind of non-traditional things that would really get attention. And some of the things that you would think about in terms of traditional measurement success for customer lifetime value is very near term or immediate. And so customer lifetime value is more about, how often is your customer coming to you and how much do they spend on average with each trip. And then you can kind of understand for how long they stay, what their overall lifetime value for you is. But this is more meant to think about out of the box ways to boost that. So when we think about how would you measure success and what KPIs would you use, it's not necessarily that actual customer lifetime value formula. It's just more about thinking about what drives someone, whether it's more trips, more value, better retention, and thinking through how you can use any of these non-traditional formats to then support increasing customer lifetime value. So the KPIs you propose here can be pretty open-ended, but logically or strategically would ladder up into increasing that customer lifetime value.
And then the final part of these slides is coming up with the action plan. So I know we discussed a little bit earlier today about how action plans can be kind of fluid. And I think that's something you can even think about as you tackle the case study. Maybe your action plan is we want to test something here, see what that is, and then we have 2 different options where we think we'll go based on that metric. I think you can definitely be creative, but an important tip here, I think, would be thinking about how you format this. So since you don't get to present your deck, you're not talking to someone about, here's my action plans, here's the 10 different options I'm thinking of. So make sure that you present the information in a way that's very concise and logical. You can kind of see in some of these example slides, using like arrows, charting things out, sectioning off the really important parts of your action plan. I think the organization will be super key and kind of summarizing everything else. And again, when it talks a little bit about the difference between near term, long term, I think it's super important for your action plan that you don't just say like, oh, we're just going to launch it and hope for the best. Really thinking about what are our short-term goals, what are the medium-term goals, and then where do we see this going in the further future, and how do we feel like this is going to be aligned with our chosen company's long-term goals for success.
Thanks, Jasmine, and thanks, Avni. Rolanda and Carolina, on that last topic of action plans, I know you talked about them, but any tips from where you sit in terms of formatting or how you find a presentation can be most effective?
For a more detailed view, I would say a Gantt chart. So where you have the various steps more detailed is incredibly effective. That then could bubble up to a higher level timeline and kind of action plan. But I'd say the more detailed, and again, it depends on your how you're presenting the information, but having even just thought out all of the steps along the way is incredibly powerful and shows that you've really tried to go through every scenario on what exactly needs to happen. Again, knowing that expectation versus reality are two very different things, but Gantt charts, I think, are very helpful.
Thanks for that. A number of questions have come in, and I think some I can dispense with, and some I'm going to toss the way of the presenters. For the marketing analytics applicants, will a data set be provided? And Avni, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but no, a data set won't be provided. This is meant to be a slightly higher level approach, so no data set. Are we required to choose a company that's publicly traded? Avni touched on this. It is, I'm pretty sure, a requirement, and it's a requirement because we really want the playing field to be level and that the information is publicly available, and we want you in your research to find the information. And so I think there's been some back and forth on this topic. We really encourage, and I think this year we may actually require that the company be publicly traded, just so that you have the ability to do the research that Rolanda and Carolina said that they'd encourage you to do, and that it's available. Sometimes companies that are cool can be obscure in terms of how much is available for you to find out about them. Let's see, what platforms or technology do you rely heavily on day to day or campaign to campaign? I'm going to toss this to any of you that might want to take that one.
Sure, I can start. Our customer data platform, we leverage Imperity for our CDP. It also is a great way to get quick insights about our customer base. That's probably the biggest one that I use every day, in addition to our email service provider, which is Salesforce Marketing Cloud on the Tapestry front.
Got it.
On Rent the Runway side, we use Delighted, which is the NPS Net Promoter Score platform that lets you easily email your customers so they can tell you if they would recommend you or not. Second would be Alchemer, previously Survey Gizmo, which is where we do all of our survey building. So we can do a lot of the research that we were discussing when surveying our own customers. And then to Carolina's point, we use Sailthrough for our email platform.
Got it. Thanks. Avni, I may ask you this question. In the customer lifetime value slide, the example showed some complicated formulas for KPIs. Are we supposed to come up with these? And if so, how and where can we find resources?
Yeah, definitely not. You are not meant to recreate the wheel and come up with the formula. I think the thinking there is that understanding that customer lifetime value is mostly driven by, certain main factors, those being the number of trips that you come, however much you spend, and then how long you stay with the company, those being the main things that you would ladder into customer lifetime value. But actually specifically for that piece of the case, we're asking for you to propose which KPIs you would use for success that would, ultimately end up driving customer lifetime value. But there's other KPIs, exactly like we've been chatting, like retention, or things like even just an example that I would throw out here is like category participation, because the more categories you shop with means that your ticket size goes up usually, or things like this. So, as you pair that with your non-traditional marketing strategies, whatever those activations are, you want to think about what specifically are you aiming for there that will in the long term drive your customer lifetime, or ultimately drive your customer lifetime value up. But definitely not meant to get in those crazy formulas over there. I don't even know if I could tell you that off the top of my head right now.
Yeah, they were impressive, but they were definitely a little daunting for me. I think, Rolanda, you mentioned this, and Carolina, you might have too. What are investor relations sites? Are there specific examples that you could help us with?
Sure. So go to any brand. So for example, for Tapestry, go to tapestry.com, or you can go to Coach, all the way down, scroll all the way down to the footer. You'll often see investor relations, and it's a separate link where you'll find all the company's filings, press releases, earnings calls, etc. I'd say most major companies, certainly all publicly traded companies, would have an IR, investor relations access insight.
Great. Thanks for that, Carolina. This question is for Rolanda, but I'm going to open it up to anyone to answer, or to all of you to answer. From your interview days, and all of you have seemed to have landed in very nice spots. Any tips for how to nail it and land the job?
How to nail it. I like that wording.
It's a very pointed question.
This is probably I'll go, and then obviously I'll let everyone jump in. Wow, it feels like time is flying by, but I would say nail it is probably translation for being over prepared. Like, there's no such thing as being over prepared. So I would say doing all of the research that we were discussing earlier. So company's website, to Carolina's point, social media profiles. Don't forget LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, the company will often post a lot of those like corporate memos, or even links to their corporate blog posts where they're talking about product launches that they've gone through recently, or some of the visioning for the year. There's a lot of good insight there. I would go through press. So like you could go to Google News and literally filter by how recent the press hit to know what's been happening in the last 6 months, what they've been thinking and talking about. Again, to like hearing some of the thought leadership from some of the executives. So I was saying like interviews at some conferences, but I even listened to podcast interviews, right? So a lot of these companies, the business leaders are thought leaders. So they'll be on, the Business of Fashion podcast and things like that. So just listening to some of the thoughts that some of those and the challenges that those companies are trying to tackle. And then I would say like a bonus point, kind of to Jasmine's point around coming in with an idea, or maybe even especially if you're a user or a fan of the brand, something that you think would be an awesome iteration or improvement. That could be something inspired by the competitor. Like I will tell you, at work, I spend a lot of time, to Jasmine's point, reading Vogue Business, reading Business of Fashion to understand what the rental and resale landscape looks like. So if you see that there's someone doing something else that is really cool, how can that company, stay relevant and stay innovative? And why would that be such an awesome improvement for their business, and why? You have your creative and you have a point of view. Don't be afraid to share and explain why.
Great. Thanks, Rolanda. I know we're running out of time. We've got 3 more questions. I'm a business major and I don't have technical marketing knowledge. I'm not as aware of the terms that I've seen in the examples. Do we have to use those terms? For example, customer lifetime value formula? Avni, Jasmine, what do you think?
Yeah, so definitely you don't need to use that customer lifetime value formula. But, a lot of the terms are common and standardized across the industry. And a lot of times, I'm sure we all can relate to this in our jobs. They end up becoming acronyms that you see over and over again as you go across jobs. So I think it's definitely really, really great to familiarize yourself with very common marketing metrics. And you can definitely find these on the internet or any types of like marketing educational content you might have from your universities. But for example, things like conversion, or I know that Carolina was talking about open rate, click-through rate, things like this. Those are kind of digital marketing terms that you would talk about. And then, you also want to look at things like reach, which is basically like how big is your audience that you could get to. And you'll see that a lot with TV. So there's things in terms of metrics actually matching up with the parts of that funnel, right? Like awareness, consideration, purchase, etc. Like at each of those funnels, you might want to think through what are some of the metrics that I would say are working at each of those. So like recall or just general awareness would be awareness. With purchase, you'd want to look at like your average order value, or maybe method of purchase, or if you gave an email address or number when you purchase, or anything like this. And then as you think through retention and advocacy, also thinking through how your potential consumer behaviors and marketing channels are performing at those stages as well. So I think there's probably a plethora of metrics that you could find if you went on the internet, and it'd be too much to look at, but really mapping them against those funnels would help you also structure how you think about it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Avni. Carolina, this is a pointed question for you, and then I've got one last one for all of you. Carolina, what do you view as good open and click rate percentages, or does it vary across segments?
How big and how old your email file is. And so you could be mailing everybody and their mother, and it would be a really, really not so great open rate or click-through rate. So I think establishing the baseline for some of your most engaged subscribers, it is a way to benchmark yourself and against the file.
Thanks. Great. Caitlin just asked, I may have missed this, but was it stated whether or not the slides would be posted anywhere for reference? This is recorded, and so we will have this on our site and together with the slide presentation, so it'll be available. So this last question, and I guess in the interest of time, I want short but really interesting answers from each of you. Kara, I'm going to start with you. Same question for all of you. Knowing what you know today, what is the best advice you would give your younger self? Kara Reed.
Always speak up. Don't be afraid. I know when I started, people always thought, oh, you're young, you probably have creative ideas. And in my mind, I thought, well, if it was good, it would be done before, but that is not the case. So speak up.
Jasmine Bacchus.
Yeah, I think mine would be embrace what makes you different. I mentioned my unique approach to the fashion industry and my different background. I think maybe you come into this feeling like, I don't know if I'm the right type of person to enter this industry or do this case study. And I think my success has been by embracing what perspective that I have and that I actually can bring to the industry. I think that's what made my case studies really special. I think that's how I've been able to land certain jobs as well.
Thanks, guys. Carolina?
And it's all about how you handle the mistakes along the way, and don't be too hard on yourself. I know it's easier said than done, but I wish I didn't beat myself up. Sleepless nights and mistakes fast. So it's all okay.
Perfect. Thanks. Avni, what about you?
Yeah, I would say with your career and anything else you do in life, do what feels right to you and what you enjoy, not necessarily what you think is the right answer for success. I mean, I've done things ranging from consulting to luxury, and now I'm at Depop, and I've enjoyed all of them, but I find myself getting closer and closer to my authentic self and my purpose as I take on more and more of those jobs. So don't worry about what someone says right is or successful is. Do what is successful for you.
Fantastic. Rolanda?
That's so hard. These are all good pieces of advice that I tell myself.
What they said,
now.
don't say +1. I want to hear something.
I'll say that the thing that I tell myself is you can do it just like everyone else can do it. I know it's sometimes really easy to compare yourself to other people's success, say that someone had a degree that you didn't have, went to school that you didn't go to, all of the things. You're smart, capable, motivated. As long as you're willing to put in the hard work, you can get it done. So I know some of us were talking about that those are words we don't know. You can Google it. You can look up resources. You can ask for help, to Jasmine's point. You can get it done just like all of us on this call got it done, and you'll get it done too.
Fantastic. Thanks. Thank you all so very much. Kara, thanks for being such a great moderator. Really, really appreciate it. And thanks for everything you guys shared. Everybody tuning in tonight, please tune in again on Thursday. It's a masterclass with designer Tom Brown. Should be really interesting. Hope we see you then. Good night to everybody. And again, thanks Carolina, Jasmine, Rolanda, Avni, and Kara very, very much. Good night, everybody.